Welcome back to Metaloop. Last week we did an oil change on a 2020 Honda Civic Type R, and in part 2 here, we're going to bleed the brakes. If you missed last week's video, that link will be in the description below, along with all the parts, tools, and specifications. My original intention in this video was to show off a pneumatic vacuum brake bleeder, but I found it to be a fairly inconsistent experience. So in this video, we'll be using the two-person buddy method. In a future video, I'll be doing a guide on the different ways of bleeding brakes. I hope you'll consider subscribing to catch that. And while you're down there, your likes and comments really help tell YouTube that this video is worth recommending to others. Thank you. If you've ever bled brakes before, you were probably taught to start from the farthest brake from the master cylinder and work your way closer. But with ABS and other systems, the FK8 10th generation Civic notably starts bleeding the brake from the driver's front brake, as you can see here in this diagram. Since our goal is to completely flush the system of old brake fluid, let's first remove as much fluid as we can from the reservoir. Here, I'm just using a cheap turkey baster from Walmart. Now that I've pinched out most of the fluid, I'm using a self-filling bottle from the pneumatic brake bleed kit. This will keep the reservoir topped off while we're bleeding the brakes. I'll have links in the description below for a couple different options to get one of your own. Now back at the caliper, turn the wheel to the left so that the caliper faces outward. You'll see here that there are two bleeder valves. You'll want to start bleeding from the outside first and then the inside. Let's get started with the outside. Even though I'm not actually using the vacuum bleeder, I'm still using it as a cash can. So pretty much it's just the fancier version of a piece of clear hose and an old bottle. If you want to make one on your own, a 3/8 hose should fit right on the bleeder valve. With the hose connected to the valve, get your buddy to sit in the driver's seat. You're going to have him pump the brakes until the pedal is stiff. Once there, break the bleeder valve loose, and you only need like a quarter of a turn. Since we're not bleeding the system for air, we don't really need to open and close the valve between brake pedal pumps. Just make sure the hose points upward so that air bubbles have somewhere to go, and watch the hose to make sure that more fluid goes out than back in. If you do see more fluid going back in than out, then you can close the valve while your partner is holding down the brake pedal. But for me, that didn't seem necessary. This Type R's fluid wasn't really that bad to begin with, so it's hard to tell when all the old fluid was drained out. For this first one, we just kept pumping until we had to refill the brake reservoir, which is a good idea to keep topped off anyways, even if you're using a self-filling bottle like I am. Now we'll do the same for the inside bleeder valve. Have your friend pump the brakes, then you can open the bleeder valve, and close the bleeder valve when the fluid is clear and bubble-free. Just to note, brake fluid, by the way, is caustic and will damage the paint on your shiny red Brembos, so make sure to spray it down with some soapy water, or brake clean if you have it. Then we'll put the tire back on, lower the car, and prepare the passenger front for bleeding, which is the second brake to bleed in sequence. Ideally, we would have just lifted the entire car on 4 jack stands, but the front jack point for the Type R, and I guess any Civic in this generation, requires an extended reach jack that I didn't have available. The good news though is that jacking the side of the car raised both the front and rear wheels, so we're able to set up to do the passenger rear brake, which is third in the sequence. And for the front passenger brake, just like before, we'll remove the tire, turn the wheel to face outward, and begin bleeding the brakes. I'll speed through this part, but here it is again, so you don't have to go back and rewatch the first caliper.
There we go. Hold down. Hold down. All right. Now we'll go to the inside. And you find the brakes a bit stiff. All right. There we go. All right. Yep, there we go.
And here back in real time, we'll finish up the front, clean up, and put on the tire before we move on. Before we start the rear, now's a good time to check the brake fluid reservoir too, which you should be keeping an eye on anyways. Once the rear passenger tire is off, you'll see that the caliper here only has one bleed valve. The process for bleeding is the same as before. Have your number 2 pump the brake and then you can crack open the valve. Continue to pump the brakes a few times to clear the old fluid and any bubbles you see. After a couple pumps, close the bleeder valve while the brake pedal is still suppressed. And that's 3 of 4 brakes completed. Since the rear driver's brake is the last one, let's lower the car again so we can jack up the driver's side and prep everything for that final wheel. We'll fast cut through this last one since it's just like the previous brake. It feels pretty good to be on the last one, and I hope you'll agree that it's really not too bad doing this kind of maintenance yourself once you get the hang of it. And we're done. All that's left to do is to lower the car one final time. Then we can make sure to top off the brake fluid in the reservoir. If you didn't change to new brake pads, I recommend filling reasonably under the max line, or else your fluid will overflow the next time you get new pads. Before we move on, we'll also torque the wheels to 94 foot-pounds. And again, those specs are in the description below. Lastly, let's get inside the car and reset the maintenance reminder. In the Type R's infotainment, we'll navigate from Settings to Vehicle, and then here in the settings, we can scroll down to the maintenance info. During the video last week, we did the oil change, so this is the same sequence. We'll reset all due items. Just confirm on the next screen and you're set. I hope you enjoyed this brake bleed video for a 2020 Honda Civic Type R, and if you did, please help me conquer the YouTube algorithm with your likes and comments. If you notice anything missing or have any tips or advice on how you bleed brakes, please leave a comment and share your knowledge with me and everyone viewing this video. I'll see you next week with a new video. I'm Alan, and this is Metaloop. Thanks so much for watching.